let me share something with you that could change your life. But first, let me ask you this. Have you ever had someone completely erase you from their world? Not through anger, not through confrontation, but through something far more brutal. Pure, deliberate silence. You text them something simple, maybe just checking in, and nothing. Hours pass, then days. You see them posting stories, laughing with friends, living their life as if you don't exist. And the worst part? You start wondering if maybe you don't. This isn't about being too busy to reply. This isn't about needing space or time to think. This is about someone deciding that you're so irrelevant, so unworthy of even basic human acknowledgement, that they can't even spare the energy to say, "I don't want to talk." They'd rather let you disappear into the void of your own confusion. Maybe you tell yourself they're just busy, that they'll respond eventually. Maybe you try to rationalize it, convince yourself it doesn't matter, that you can simply move on. And yet, despite all your efforts to dismiss it, the silence grows louder. It's almost as if their absence has more presence than their words ever did. What you don't realize is that this isn't accidental. This isn't someone being overwhelmed or needing space. What's happening to you is actually a really effective form of psychological control, and the person doing it might not even realize how powerful this behavior really is. But here's what most people never understand. The silence isn't random, it's deliberate, and it's designed to do exactly what it's doing to you right now. Because sometimes the people who ignore us aren't just being distant, they're using a form of control so subtle, so effective, that it leaves you questioning not just what you did wrong, but whether you matter at all. And this is where it all starts to make sense. When someone ignores you completely, you're not just dealing with their absence, you're facing something much deeper, the fear of being rejected that's built into all of us. Your brain can't tell the difference between being ignored by someone you care about and being completely rejected by everyone who matters. It triggers the same panic, the same stress, the same feeling that something is seriously wrong. Your body reacts like you're in actual danger because deep down, being cut off from people always felt like a threat. But here's what's really happening. The person ignoring you isn't just triggering your fears. They're activating patterns from your past, old wounds, and beliefs about your own worth that you might not even know you carry. Have you ever noticed how some people's silence affects you more than others? How certain people seem to have the power to mess with your head just by not responding, while others could disappear and you'd barely notice? This isn't coincidence. Your mind has already decided who has the power to hurt you, often based on what they represent rather than who they actually are. And here's where it gets even more complex, because the psychology behind why someone ignores you completely often has nothing to do with you at all. How we treat others reflects what's going on inside us, and this is especially true when someone deliberately uses silence as a weapon. When someone ignores you completely, they're often acting out their own psychological patterns. Maybe they learned early on that withholding attention was the only way to feel powerful in relationships. Maybe they discovered that silence could control others better than words ever could. Maybe they're unconsciously repeating dynamics from their childhood where emotional withdrawal was the ultimate punishment. The person who ignores you isn't necessarily trying to be cruel. They might be operating from their own wounded place, using silence as protection against getting too close or vulnerable. But the effect is the same. They've turned your need for connection into a source of their own psychological comfort. This is projection in its most destructive form. They're not seeing you as a complete person who deserves basic human communication. They're seeing you as a piece in their psychological game, someone whose reactions serve their need to feel important, powerful, or in control. Think about the last time someone's silence completely consumed your thoughts. Were you really missing them, or were you desperately trying to figure out your own worth? Were you longing for their presence, or frantically looking for proof that you mattered? Because what silence does isn't just remove someone from your life. It forces you to question your place in theirs. But there's something even more calculated happening beneath the surface. The reason being ignored feels so much worse than being directly rejected is because silence doesn't give you anything to work with. Rejection, as painful as it is, gives you closure. Arguments, as heated as they get, offer some kind of resolution. But silence. Silence creates a void that your mind desperately tries to fill. This is where the real psychological manipulation happens, not necessarily on purpose, but because of how our minds work. When someone ignores you completely, they force you into a state where you're constantly looking for signs, hints, any evidence that you still exist in their world. Every time you check if they've seen your message, every time you wonder what they're thinking, every time you change your behavior hoping to get a response, you're basically training yourself to become more invested in someone who's giving you nothing. It's psychological conditioning at its most effective, and the person doing it doesn't even have to be there for it to work. This kind of dynamic reveals something important about both people involved. The person using silence is likely dealing with their own unhealed wounds, perhaps a deep fear of intimacy, a need to maintain control, or an unconscious belief that distance equals safety. They're not necessarily trying to hurt you, they're trying to protect themselves using the only strategy they know. But you, the person being ignored, are being shown something equally important about yourself. Your intense reaction to their silence is revealing where you're still looking for external validation, where you're seeking others to confirm your worth, where you haven't yet learned to find security within yourself. And this is where everything begins to shift. Because once you understand what's really happening beneath the surface, the spell starts to break. The person who seemed to hold so much power over you with their silence begins to look different. You start to see them not as someone who's rejecting you, but as someone who's so uncomfortable with emotional closeness that they'd rather disappear than deal with it. Every relationship is a mirror, showing us something about ourselves that we need to see. The person who ignores you isn't teaching you about your worth. They're showing you where you're still giving your power away. They're revealing where you're still looking for validation from others instead of finding it within yourself. Maybe their silence is showing you that you've been seeking approval from someone who's incapable of giving it. Maybe it's revealing that you've been trying to force connection with someone who's fundamentally unavailable. Maybe it's demonstrating that you've been more invested in the idea of them than in the reality of who they actually are. Have you ever considered that the people who affect us most deeply through their absence are often the ones who were never fully present to begin with? That the silence that devastates us might be revealing a pattern we've been unconsciously participating in, seeking love from people who are emotionally unavailable, trying to earn attention from those who withhold it, chasing connection with people who offer only scraps. This isn't about blaming yourself for their behavior. It's about recognizing that your intense reaction to their silence is information, data about your own patterns, your own wounds, your own areas where healing is needed. But even deeper than patterns and projections lies something else, something even more transformative. The unhealed parts of yourself that make certain silences unbearable, the childhood wounds that make emotional abandonment feel like the end of the world, the core beliefs about your own lovability that get triggered when someone withdraws. We don't just react to what's happening now, we react to what's happening now through the filter of everything that's happened before. When someone's silence devastates you, you're not just experiencing their absence. You're re-experiencing every time you felt forgotten, overlooked, or abandoned. Maybe it was a parent who withdrew their love when you misbehaved. Maybe it was a caregiver who was physically present but emotionally absent. Maybe it was early experiences that taught you that love was conditional, that attention had to be earned, that silence meant you had done something terribly wrong. The person ignoring you now isn't just one person, they're activating an entire network of past experiences, old wounds, and unprocessed emotions. They're not just withholding their communication, they're triggering your deepest fears about your own worthiness of love and connection. But here's what changes everything once you truly understand it. These reactions, as painful as they are actually your psyche's way of bringing your attention to what needs healing. The people who can wound us most deeply with their silence are often pointing us toward the very areas where we need to develop greater self-compassion, self-worth, and emotional independence. Think about it this way. If you were completely secure in your own worth, if you had unshakable confidence in your own lovability, if you knew beyond a doubt that your value didn't depend on anyone else's recognition, Would someone's silence have the same power over you? Would their absence create the same emotional devastation? This isn't about becoming cold or unfeeling. It's about developing what Jung called a solid sense of self, an internal foundation so strong that external validation becomes a nice addition rather than a desperate necessity. So what is it? What is the wound beneath your reaction to their silence? Is it a fear of abandonment that goes back to your earliest relationships? Is it a belief that you have to earn love rather than simply receive it? Is it a deep-seated conviction that if someone doesn't respond to you, it means you don't matter? Because until you stop asking why they won't respond and start asking what their silence is revealing about your own relationship with yourself, the pattern will keep repeating. You'll find yourself devastated by the next person who withdraws, confused by the next individual who chooses silence over communication, wounded by the next relationship where emotional availability remains just out of reach. The person who ignores you is not your problem to solve. They are showing you through their behavior exactly who they are and how they handle emotional intimacy. The real work, the transformative work, is not figuring out how to get them to respond. It's understanding why their silence affects you so profoundly and healing whatever wounds are being triggered. This doesn't mean their behavior is acceptable. This doesn't mean you should tolerate being treated as if you don't exist. This means recognizing that someone who uses silence as a weapon is revealing their own emotional limitations, and your intense reaction is revealing areas where you still need to strengthen your own emotional foundation. But here's where true liberation begins, because understanding the psychology behind their silence and your reaction to it is just the first step. Once you recognize what's really happening, you have to learn how to free yourself from the power their absence holds over you. And that is where we begin the journey toward emotional independence, the path of reclaiming your sense of self from people who were never qualified to define it. If you've come this far, you've likely realized something profound. The person whose silence has been consuming your thoughts isn't just someone who's ignoring you. They are a mirror reflecting back the parts of yourself that are still seeking external validation, still wounded by old abandonments, still believing that someone else's attention determines your worth. And now that you've seen the projection, the patterns, the wounds, and the deeper psychology at work, it's time to ask the real question: how do you finally break free from the power their silence holds over you? Jung believed that true healing comes not from getting others to change their behavior, but from understanding why certain behaviors affect us so deeply. The goal isn't to make them respond to you, it's to reach a place where their response or lack thereof no longer determines your emotional state. Breaking free is not about convincing yourself that you don't care. It's about genuinely reaching a place where their silence becomes irrelevant to your sense of self-worth. Most people try to move on by forcing themselves to stop thinking about it, by diving into distractions, by convincing themselves that the person never mattered anyway. But emotional liberation doesn't come from suppression, it comes from integration. Maybe their silence revealed that you've been seeking from them what you need to give yourself: validation, attention, proof of your worth. Maybe it exposed wounds from your past that need your compassion and healing. Maybe it showed you patterns where you consistently choose emotionally unavailable people, hoping to finally earn the love that feels so elusive. The key to breaking free is not to push these realizations away, but to embrace them, to thank this person's silence for showing you exactly where your healing work needs to focus. To recognize that they were never the source of what you were seeking. They were simply the trigger that revealed what was already there, waiting to be addressed. The reason their silence has such power over you is because you've unconsciously given them authority over your emotional well-being, and the only way to truly move forward is to revoke that authority, to take back the power you didn't even realize you had given away. This is what emotional maturity looks like, recognizing that someone's inability or unwillingness to communicate says nothing about your worth and everything about their own emotional capacity. Understanding that silence, as painful as it feels, is actually information. It's them showing you exactly how they handle conflict, intimacy, and relationship challenges. So instead of asking, "Why won't they respond to me?" ask, What is their silence teaching me about my own patterns? Instead of trying to decode their absence, try to understand your own reaction. Instead of waiting for closure from them, create it within yourself by addressing the wounds their silence exposed. The moment you stop seeing their response as essential to your peace is the moment you begin to reclaim your emotional freedom. You realize that the person you were waiting to hear from was never them. It was always the voice of your own self-worth, which had been drowned out by the noise of seeking external validation. There comes a moment when you realize their silence is no longer about them. It's about you reclaiming the parts of yourself you had unknowingly given away. The confusion, the analysis, the desperate need for their response, these were never truly about that person at all. They were symptoms of a deeper disconnection from your own inner foundation. What disturbs us in others is often a reflection of what needs attention within ourselves. The person whose silence devastated you was never your source of peace. They were the catalyst that revealed where your peace had been compromised. And the moment you stop looking to them for resolution and start providing it for yourself, everything changes. You were never being ignored because you weren't worth responding to. You were encountering someone whose own wounds and limitations prevent them from engaging in healthy communication, and your reaction was showing you exactly where your own healing journey needs to focus. The silence that once felt like rejection becomes the quiet space where you finally learn to validate yourself. The absence that once felt like abandonment becomes the emptiness that you fill with self-compassion. The person who seemed to hold all the power reveals themselves to be simply another wounded human doing the best they can with their own unhealed places. It's time. Stop waiting for their voice and start listening to your own. The healing you've been seeking was never going to come from their response. It was always waiting for you to turn inward and provide for yourself what you had been desperately seeking from them. If this message opened your eyes to something you hadn't seen before, if it helped you understand the deeper psychology behind someone's silence and your reaction to it, then this insight reached you exactly when you needed it. Subscribe for more deep explorations into the hidden dynamics that shape our relationships and our reactions to them. And if this perspective genuinely shifted something for you, the Super Thanks button is there to support more content that goes beyond surface-level advice to explore the real psychological forces at work in our lives. Thanks for watching.